Where do you
One of
want what?
my best friends I've never met that I've been collaborating for like, I don't know what, 5, 6 years, and we talk
At
and
least.
communicate, and, we're both brother Marines, and he's over there, and we're over here across the pond.
Who's that?
Ben Ford, Royal Marine Commando.
Mate, I mean, I've been waiting for this invite since episode 2. So
Well, we
I'm
kept
really glad
sending
to
you
meet you.
invites. You just have you've
We
ignored
wanted
them.
to get it perfected before we brought you on. We didn't want to go half-ass, so.
How very un-OODA of you.
Yeah. Hey, I have an idea. Let's just come up with some ideas to talk about just for the next 3 minutes. Just go throw ideas around. We don't have to anchor on anything yet. And then at the end of 3 minutes or so, it's I got the time right now. We'll decide what we want to talk about. So I'll throw this out there. The machine is fractal. Heard that this morning. Fractal approaches to everything. Sacred geometry. We've been talking about that a little bit on the podcast. Many people push back on it. I don't care. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Ben. What do you want to talk about? We'll keep going around in circles.
So I would love to look at some of these links between Boyd's work and some of the newer neuroscience and pure mathematics stuff that you guys have been digging into with the folks from Versus and Free Energy Principle. I think there's a really interesting seam to pull on there that kind of takes Boyd way beyond warfare and like right into kind of current times.
Moose.
Fractal was one of the first conversations I remember having with Ben years ago. We were talking about how orientation was fractal. That would be cool to talk about. The neuroscience heavy of the duo is, of course, Ponch. So I always get my notebook out.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, maybe. Go ahead, Moose.
I keep finding that what I think all three of us are dialed in on is that authentic Boyd still has a lot of runway. And when you integrate authentic Boyd, one, you can find things that are allegedly new that Boyd already did a long time ago. We just called it something else. But two, and this is what a lot of the stuff I've been writing about, when you look at, there's other snowmobiles to make with Boyd of other thinkers like Marshall McLuhan, for example. And when you have depth of one, it's easier in learning the other actually makes your depth of the original. So like the more I learn about McLuhan, the better I get at Boyd, and vice versa. The more I'm bored about Boyd, I feel like the better I get at McLuhan. I think that there's a lot out there that people have left on the table.
All right,
Yeah, I agree with that. That's very category theoretic of you as well, mapping between different domains.
Yeah.
I've got another one. Outside information. We've got 3 sources of information on the outside, and you're probably looking at my screen going, what the hell did you come up with, Ponch? We'll talk about that some other time. But outside information, very few people talk about this. Connection to the Muse. We've had folks talk about telepathy tapes on the show. Maybe the Akashic records. It's just one of those things that I think many folks ignore when they look at the OODA loop. That is, what do those 3 things on the left side actually mean? That might be something we could explore as well. Ben, your turn.
Yeah, so I want to dig into unfolding circumstances. There's a very particular meaning to folding and unfolding within functional programming and category theory. I think I've been kicking around some ideas, basically looking at the intersection between Boyd's work and that economics Nobel Prize.
Yeah. Destruction and creation.
Destructive creation. So I'd love to kind of dig into what's folding and unfolding in destruction and creation, where we can take that. That would be cool.
But all right. We got another minute. Moose, over to you. You get the last one.
Well, being an economist, like having a master's degree in it, and Ponch has a degree in economics, and John Boyd has a degree in economics. The creative destruction that they talk about comes from Joseph Schumpeter, whose book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, was one of the books that Boyd actually read. It's on my list of return trip to the archives. That's definitely one of the books I want to find to see as margin notes, because there was a LinkedIn post, I think we probably all saw it, like somebody was saying that this is plagiarizing Boyd, but Boyd was Boyd actually reversed Schumpeter, but I think that it still goes without saying. I think Boyd took it deeper, and I think that Boyd's actually at a higher level than these economists, quite honestly, because I think that they're looking at a triangle, and Boyd was looking at a pyramid. They're looking at one side of a pyramid, and there's a lot more.
I think my internet's
Well, let's start on the outside there, where Ben brought us up to unfolding circumstances. I brought up outside information, but let's start there and bring it onto the inside of the OODA loop, which I believe takes us into FEP and to other things. Ben, when I talk about unfolding circumstances, and today the guys at Hedgeye were talking about when you got somebody on the ropes, it's time to go ahead and take some type of actions. We've had John Flack on here. We've had other folks come on the show to talk about affordances. Unfolding circumstances to me mean affordances created by other living systems. So I'll throw that in your lap and tell me where to go with that.
Hey, my internet just had a little bit of a wobble, but it seems to be okay now. Fingers
No, I was
crossed.
just saying, hey, so unfolding circumstances, to me, that's an affordance created by another living system, an opportunity for action for us. So going back to your point about it earlier, what's it mean to you?
So if you think about like when we take action, we cast a bunch of ripples into the environment, right? And there are multiple other agencies, entities doing the same thing. And so our unfolding circumstances are, all of the multiple ways that those things can interact and overlap. And the way I see it is our orientation is basically figuring out like what the pattern matching, reverse engineering, what those overlapping threads means, right? And ascribing some kind of pattern recognition and model of the world, that kind of inside out model of the world to those patterns, right? So when I think about unfolding, when you unfold from a kind of category theory functional programming point of view, you start with a seed, something, and then you generate a whole bunch of things from that something. So it could be, geometric progression or a bunch of different possibilities for a trading system. And all of those are kind of unfolding possibilities, few of which are eventually followed, and all of which are possible, but few of which are actually followed.
Let me ask you this. Do you have to take an action to see an unfolding circumstance, or can you just sit back and observe?
So I think you can. And I think this is maybe where people, like I like to, when I explain OODA, try and start from the point of view of action. Because if you think about, the active inference lens that you guys have been really successfully shining on this, you don't really have the ability to orientate until you've put something into the world to try and react to, right? So yes, you can sit and observe, but in reality, my visual field is being built by my eyes making their little movements, right? So I'm not sitting here passively absorbing this conversation in the world. So yes, I think there is a model of Boyd where you're basically sat as some kind of passive observer, but I think in practice that's not really how it works, especially when you bring in FEP and all the other stuff you guys have been talking about.
So, hey, Ben, the three sources of information that we have on the OODA loop, the third one would be unfolding interaction with the environment. To me, that would be that negative feedback loop that I guess you can call it a negative feedback loop. But once we take some type of action onto the environment, which it could be observing or moving our head, whatever it may be, that mixes with the features of the world, right? The features of the world, which include entropy, uncertainty, mutations, and all that. So walk me through how we, I'm a little stuck on your description at the moment. So unfolding would be our actions mixing with everybody else's. Is that correct?
Yeah. So within, so there's a mathematical structure, which is kind of like so just to take a step back, the very weird little pathway I found myself going as a software engineer, kind of before or just around about the time I came across Boyd, was functional programming, specifically a programming language called Haskell. Haskell is a quite academic language, and it's very influenced by category theory. So there's this kind of relationship between, I know you've had a few guests on who talk about category theories. The mathematical structures within category theory kind of feed into this kind of programming language that I was using for a long time. Unfolding in there is essentially you start from a seed and you generate a structure from that seed. And a very simple example might be start from 0, add 1, keep adding 1, and then you get an array of natural numbers. But that's a simple linear unfolding. You can have fractal unfolding where you unfold something that then unfolds something that then unfolds something, and you end up with these quite big structures being built. And then the opposite, or the dual of an unfold, is a fold, right? So all of these structures that you build up, you then collapse down, right? So you create and then you destroy. There's quite an interesting, you can look at create and destroy from either lens there, right? So if you start with something you can create something from that, or you can consider that you're exploding something to expand into new things. Did I drop out again for a sec there?
Yeah.
You did for a moment, but it'll pick up. We'll be fine.
Okay. Yeah. So you've got this kind of, depending on how you look at creation and destruction, you can consider expanding from a single point into multiple as creation, or you consider exploding that single point into multiple things as destruction. Right. So depending on how you want to look at that, and I think there's something quite interesting with, I was playing around with some of this stuff with the help of Claude the other day. Internally, our orientation, we need to destroy and recreate our internal models of the world. So what I'm thinking at the moment is that your unfolding interaction with the environment is destroyed or compacted down into your orientation, which is then again exploded out into your various different courses of action and the ones that you choose as actions. And then the loop continues in that fractal kind of way.
And so you've been into category theory a little bit deeper than we have. The folks that came on, we worked with at an oil and gas company. They went into MIT for safety, looking at, I forget the name of the safety protocols, but they ended up coming out being very familiar with category theory, and that's the path they're on now. Do you have any more background on category theory for knuckleheads like me? Because when they were on here, I was like, it kind of sounds like FEP. It sounds like a lot of active inference and predictive processing and understanding complex adaptive systems. But do you have any more you could highlight with that?
Yeah, so I'm some way from being a mathematician by any means. The way I think of category theory is it's a common language that allows you to map multiple different disciplines to a single thing, right? So category theory, because it's so abstract and so general, you can make these kind of statements. If you have a category, or if you have a mathematical structure that forms a category, you can make these inferences about it. And it turns out that there's a lot of these, right? So there's a lot in physics, there's a lot in economics, there's, I follow this guy on LinkedIn who comes out with literally a new paper on category theory across various different things. I think the one he came out with the other day was portfolio construction in economics, right? So because it's so abstract, it's very applicable to multiple different things. I know that the Versus team have got a big team of category theorists who are, basically built using this concept of lenses, which is one more advanced area of category theory. I don't pretend to have the maths to understand, but they're using Bayesian lenses to model the free energy principle and the things that they use to then engineer smarter agents out of that. So it's it's so abstract that it doesn't make any sense when you kind of look at it, but it underpins lots and lots of the different kind of software libraries and things that I've used. And there are some very useful kind of properties that drop out of knowing that something is a category.
So I don't know if you caught the episode with Dan Mapes, the part that we recorded with him. He actually brought up that the why is FEP, the free energy principle, why. The how is active inference, and the what is the OODA loop. That part he recorded with me, or he brought up after we stopped recording. But the idea there is understanding the principle, why does this thing exist, how we're actively engaging the active inference part of active inference, where we're running internal simulations, and they're also taking action on the outside. So internal simulations, I want to make this very clear because I know Moose has druthers with this as well. Internal simulations about reducing future uncertainty and future risk, or uncertainty and risk. So you do not need to create an OODA R model, an OODA risk model, because it's inherently built into it, right? And that's one of the things that Moose and I talk about quite often. But anyway, the point there is having gained access to these folks. And I don't know if we'll ever get Carl Friston on the show, but the things they're talking about are kind of inherent inside of what John Boyd gave us through his sketch and all the work prior to that, right? So, I want to hear your thoughts on that. Or Moose, do you have any other, anything you want to share there?
Yeah, I need some learning curve crunch on category theory, but like prima facie, it seems like a lot of the things that he's talking about in conceptual spiral, like building on things, showing relationships, and then creating new mathematical, in this case, math. It seems, pardon the pun, it seems like there's some conceptual similarities, but
if I remember correctly, it's about the context too, right? It's the context that matters. So we're talking to data scientists. It's not it's the context that matters around data. and the relationships that matter around them, right? Not the
So in
objects.
other words, the orientation.
Yeah. So is that true, Ben? Is that a good way to look at it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Dave Snowden, who was, I guess, number one, right? I think Dave would, and most complexity scientists would say that it's the relationships between things that really convey most of the meaning, rather than the things themselves. So when you're talking about relationships, you end up talking about graphs, and when you're talking about sort of traversing graphs and bringing things together, you're talking about collapsing, right? If you're doing data science, you're doing very generally, some sort of graph traversal. Like if you're doing a database query, you've got a bunch of different entities in different tables. Those have relationships to other tables. And to do a query, you're essentially doing a graph traversal across the whole thing and then generally aggregating it down, right? So you're traversing across a whole bunch of data and then you're crunching it, destroying it, if we're talking about destruction and creation, down to a single entity. Another, the dual way of looking at it, similar to the unfolding and folding thing, you could say, well, I'm just going to take all this data and I'm going to crunch it down into something. So have I destroyed it or have I created something new? Right. I think where it gets really interesting with destruction and creation is, destruction is creation and creation is destruction, depending on which lens you choose to look at this.
Depending on orientation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, even unfolding circumstances have to have perception that filters through orientation. Orientation shapes how you look at those unfolding circumstances too, right?
Yep. And the selection and bias of implicit guidance and control from your orientation to your observation is also a form of destruction, because you're filtering out certain things that you are not paying attention to, or
Yes.
not aligned with, or you don't have.
Yes. So was that IGNC from orientation to observation or orientation to action? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it acts as a filtering mechanism. It's kind of like your reticular activating system. It prevents you from seeing things that are right in front of you, right?
Yeah.
So the whole idea that I'm learning from FEP and PCT, which is perceptual control theory, EP, which is ecological psychology, all these things kind of have, to me, they're all looking at the OODA loop from a different lens or different perspective. What that's telling me is that, and going back to Dave Snowden's work where he talks about inattentional blindness, I think it's not his work, but he borrows that. We only see what we expect to see. So that IGNC pathway there, that I call perception, it's just your ego, your default mode, a way of operating or seeing the world. That is an essential component of the OODA loop that many people forget about. It's just not there. It's like this, it's the interplay between the interactions between observation and orientation, as well as the active side of active inference in your predictions. So Bayesian brain, all that comes into that perception. Is that how you kind of look at it as well, Ben?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's the really interesting thing of, looking at, and again, like I don't really have the mathematics background to understand FEP in all its glory. One day I'll take 6 months off and learn enough to actually implement, an algorithm for it. So I really, really do understand it. But at the moment, I'm kind of vibe understanding it, right, at best. But the way I look at it is that boundary between, Ponch, I think you've seen my different diagram of OODA, where it's like it's a circle, right? And you've got your observations coming in and your actions coming out from the other side.
Yeah.
So that boundary, and I think Chet said that towards the end of his life, Boyd was reconsidering his sketch and wanting to make it, orientation as the whole thing in some way.
That's what we talk about. Well, every day, because I just got off something, a call earlier, and we were having that discussion. It was someone who's a previous guest and all this, a collaborator. And it really, the epiphany that people that think they know Boyd have is that really orientation is exactly what he's talking about. Orientation is literally how we do 100% of everything, how we sense, decide, react, how we learn, how we think, how we feel, all flows from orientation.
So on that, Ben, you brought up some of the guests we've had on PCT. We're working on the EP, the Gibson affordances, the Gibsonian view of everything. So starting with the outside, the affordances, and looking in what some of these theories say, and I might get this wrong, is that there is no prediction, there is no world model, there is no mental model. It's just us having access. And again, the way I look at it is they're looking at part of the OODA loop and saying it's the outside information, the unfolding circumstances, those affordances, those opportunities for action that are acted upon that drive our perception, perceptual control theory. Again, it's looking at the action, the outside world, and perception and saying those are the only things that matter. And then you get into the EP side of the world, which is the constraints-led approach in sports, which is fantastic. They'll say the same thing. There is no prediction. A baseball batter doesn't predict where that ball is going to go, right? And I'm like, I kind of get that. They don't sit there and calculate where it's going to go all the time. I don't think that's necessarily true because the neuroimaging and all that says that we do some calculations, some prediction in there. But it's that implicit guidance control pathway from orientation to action. And I think that's the place that is a moneymaker for all of us. That's intuition. And in my view, it's skills. It's skills. And what I'm learning from the EP side of the house, the ecological psychology, the constraints-led approach is when you're training athletes in skill acquisition, teams, what I like about what they say is the context is always changing. Air pressure is changing, the temperature is changing, the ball pressure is changing, the joints are moving. There is no one set way to release a basketball in a shot, right? There's essential elements, those invariants that John Boyd talked about, right? So I believe when you bring it all together, everybody is chasing Boyd. They're identifying what Boyd brought together, and I think it's when he just say break it down and going back to Moose's point, you're looking at a triangle, you're looking at a pyramid, you're looking at the bottom of the pyramid, you're looking at a square, right? That's what's happening right now. Everybody's looking at the world from different perspectives saying, that's what I see. And what we're saying is, we believe the OODA loop, and I don't know how you feel about this, Ben, but it kind of encapsulates FEP, constructal law, maybe category theory. I don't know about that. I might be off on that. Ecological psychology, a PCT, perceptual control theory. So many things that I believe if you were to sit down and do 6 months of math, you can put it all in there and go, this is how it actually works.
Should I say the quote punch that I say all the time?
Yeah.
I mean, because of AI, maybe now we can finally catch up to Boyd, but I don't, because he, it's like you were saying towards the end of his life and speaking with Chet, the other thing that he was looking at was also too, the evolutionary biology and all these other things that just it's so much more than the linear bullshit. I think that the three of us know that. And when you think about talking about even what we're talking about, when you show people this, you have a real opportunity to advise them to break their perception of what they think is real and get them to a position, guide them to a position or even empower them to a position where they can achieve excellence and thrive versus just merely survive on our own terms and actually live destruction creation.
I'd have to say that OODA, observe-orient-decide-act, is a perspective when you look at Boyd's OODA loop, right?
Yep.
I mean,
I like to say
but
that.
If you take it out, though, if you take out the top part, like the labels, that's because that's where everybody gets stuck on. Just take that out and just leave the sketch. Observations don't become a step or a phase. That's just when you hear people say that, you're like, and then the most important is the orientation phase. It's like, wow, I wish I was competing against you because you don't know what the hell you're talking about.
That's why I draw it like this now, right? For that reason. Because now it looks like areas that matter rather than pathways.
Well, and the Markov blanket's important too, because I think that people forget that this is all cognitive. It's all happening internally and that very little of it's happening. Anything that happens external is only happening because you perceive it so.
So I might push back against that slightly.
Bring it.
When we're talking about skill development, for the longest time, the biggest mistake I made when I was trying to learn this language, Haskell, was just reading about it, not programming it, right? So my ability to take my thoughts and put them into code depends on me moving my body and typing shit into a keyboard to actually write the code, right? If I'm not doing that, if I'm doing it all in my head, I don't have that embodied feedback loop to the degree.
I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm just saying that your whole perception of that is all internal.
I want to build on this.
This is one of the things early on I learned from Ponch and how we even got together was I had never seen OODA loop drawn in a way. And then I finally saw the spinny thing, with the boundary between what's internal and outside but I always perceived that. Like I always thought that like all of this was happening inside of me. And
Yeah.
anything outside that has meaning to me, anything that is unfolding, anything that is emergent, it only emerges to me or becomes apparent to me only because of my own orientation, not because of anything else. There's no objectivity.
Mm. So that's really interesting. So if we think back to Heisenberg, right, there's always another external perspective, right? We're back into fractals now. So if we take another example of skill, right, one of the things I did a few years ago, I took a motorbike on track for the first time, right? And I read a book, like I do. I read a book about motorcycle mechanics, so I had a kind of an idea of what was happening on this thing.
You had a baseline.
Yeah, I had a baseline understanding. You know, bike geometry changes when you roll off the throttle. The wheelbase shortens. That tips you in more, and none of that fucking mattered at all. Because when you're on the track, that bike was an extension of my body. So although all the orientation was internal, me as a system operating that extended to the tires of the bike touching the road. I'm convinced of this, right? So when I was going round the corner with my knee on the deck and looking around the corner, throttle here, I was not thinking about where's that throttle.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what is this bike doing underneath me right now. So where do I
That's
begin?
Marshall McLuhan. That system, that technology, that medium became an extension of you. It's just like what Punch talks about a lot. When what Boyd came to the realization from the Navy Top Gun guys was that the plane is an extension of the pilot. That's the most important thing in the thing, not so much the engineering.
So I've been looking a lot into constraints-led approach, ecological approach to coaching, Ben. And what you just brought up and going back to your learning about the code is knowledge about versus knowledge of. And that's actually something we get from Gibson. So knowledge about this thing. So think about like Scrum. Scrum provides you knowledge about the way teams work. They plan, execute, assess, right? That's it. It's like taking kids and showing them to kick around a cone for soccer or football where you are, soccer here in the US. Knowledge of how is what you just described. That's the exploration. Your body, your proprioception, interoception, all that stuff, the connectedness to the external world by the act of doing, right? Acting, right? So what, again, I'm learning a lot from the ecological side of coaching side of the house where they understand constraints and things like that. They get a few things wrong here and there. That's fine. But you nailed it. You have to actually go out and execute these things. You have to do these things. And John Boyd, when you go back to his aerial attack study, right? Or let's start with the aerial attack study. He had both knowledge about and knowledge of. He was able to break that down to provide that information to others, right? And that's what that matters is knowledge of how to do something doesn't always mean bring about knowledge about, right? So I'm glad you brought that up, Ben.
Sorry, interruption from.
You got a live child in it?
I've got an entity in my environment that is searching for external energy and utilizing all means at her disposal to find it. Means being dad who's sat on a computer who needs to order something.
Nice.
Sorry,
No.
My internet was cutting out a little bit there.
No, that's fine. We were just talking about the knowledge about, knowledge of, what we were bringing back from your point.
What about understanding? Because I think knowledge is one thing, but understanding is a whole completely different thing. I think back to, I'm pretty sure it's an MCDP2 intelligence, but also 5 planning about the hierarchy of knowledge or the hierarchy of information. And then there's unprocessed data, there's processed data, which becomes information, which becomes knowledge. And that's where most people stop. But then beyond knowledge would be understanding. I understand. So I can see phenomena. These circumstances are unfolding and I understand it because I'm oriented that way. And then higher above that is wisdom. I have the wisdom above the understanding. Because I think that most are stuck in knowledge traps. I think that most think that just because they know a lot of stuff. I also think that understanding too is how could you do destruction and creation if you couldn't understand? How could you do analysis and synthesis if you didn't understand?
Well, my point there, Moose, is that there's a difference between reading something and then doing something, right? So there's a coach that knows to run certain things, to run drills around cones. The problem with that is perception is not coupled with action. So as a kid going through the cones, I don't know why I'm doing that. I'm just doing that, right? So we're missing out on that perception or that information from the external environment. I'll argue that's what happened with Agile. Scrum gave us that. They gave us the knowledge about the way teams work, right? So we're just going through this thing, but we're missing that information. How do you actually work together with somebody? How do you work together with somebody? You can think of it as like relative effectiveness, right? Yeah, relative effectiveness. If your objective is to suck less than everybody else, then Scrum is a good thing, right? I don't need to be better than you. I just need to suck less than you, which is kind of the same thing. But if you want to dominate, you need to find the most effective way to do things. And I think that's what we're talking about in skill acquisition and the use of the OODA loop is, hey, perception is top down, inside out. We do have some predictions. We understand perception and action need to be coupled, perception, action loop, all that important stuff. We need to build how do you build those skills matters. The skills on IG and C, how you do that is, I think what we're talking about here is, what is the most effective way to do that? And I think it is the things that we coach through like the Flow Learning Lab, doing simulations and exploration, letting the people explore and discover for themselves how to work together rather than giving them something and go, here's knowledge about something. And I think that's where a lot of organizations go wrong. So thanks for letting me go through that. That was kind of stuck in my head, but that's what we're really talking about, is skill acquisition to dominate in this world, right?
That's kind of the difference between how we advise and consult versus other places, though, right, Ponch? I mean, because we're trying to lead people to understanding, not to lead them to knowledge.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. But they get that through experience, and it has to be an experience. And that's what Ben brought up is, I read about this stuff, but it doesn't do you any good until you actually go out there and explore it, right?
Yeah, even something super academic like programming. Even, in terms of a skill, I mean, that's the most unembodied skill you could possibly imagine, right? It's knowledge work. In theory, you should be able to sit and work out all this shit in your head and make it work. But actually in practice, it's far, far more effective to be typing stuff into a keyboard and going through that kind of failure loop of, I tried this, didn't work, I start to build some intuition about what good code looks like. I start to build some intuition about what the compiler errors are telling me and what I need to do about it. But none of that stuff is anywhere near as effective if you're just trying to learn it from a book first. The learning from a book helps a bit because you have that kind of kind of warming up of knowledge, but there's no bridge between knowledge and skill without practice, right? Without actually doing it in any field.
Yeah. And that goes for teamwork. We talk about that quite a bit. Folks just go, we already know how to do this. Actually, you don't. You need a refresher course on it from time to time. You need to get reblued. The way we talk about it from the weapons school, you need to learn how to do these things. Yeah, I think we're all on the same page. Where do we differ? What are you seeing from time to time that we're putting out where you kind of disagree, Ben?
He calls football,
other than that, yeah,
gridiron. He spells flavor O-U-R. We spell it O-R.
Same with color behavior.
Don't even get me onto what that can's made of, for God's sake.
Well, Ben heard me say the first time we met.
Aluminium?
Well, nobody speaks English like the English. We have destroyed that language in this country.
I speak American.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So I don't think I hear all of your kind of guess. I mean, this is the beauty of OODA, right? Mark, you said something earlier, now that we've got AI, are we going to catch up with Boyd? We won't ever catch up with Boyd because there is always, there's the learning curve, right? And there's always somebody building more curve because everything that people do, because Boyd is so general and so ahead of his time, everything that people does kind of adds to Boyd, right? So, you think you've caught up with Boyd and then you come across Carl Friston. It's like, oh shit, Carl Friston's talking about OODA as well. Now there's all this other kind of abstract maths and other stuff I need to learn to understand, to understand Boyd, right? So we'll never catch up. That's the beauty of it. It's an open world game.
That was his intent. That was his intent, was to leave an open source, open system.
Well, put yourself in the shoes of an academic who looks at us and goes, what the hell are you guys talking about? Because when they go look on the web, what do they find? Observe-orient-decide-act are like, it's a stupid loop. What are you talking about, right? So academics generally push back on anything we have to say.
Yeah.
Because they didn't learn it at Harvard. They didn't. I mean, that's why they hated Boyd, because he didn't have the quote unquote credentials.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard. I've done a few roles where I've been working with groups of PhDs, like computer science PhDs who've been transplanted to work in industry, and the way knowledge is transmitted in those environments is very, very different, right? So you're not generally going to find somebody who's come from an academic background who would take notice for somebody that only wrote one paper in 1976, right?
So there's that.
Yeah, there's that.
I mean, some don't get me wrong. Some papers from the 1970s are absolutely foundational. Like the stuff that we're talking about with category theory was 1950s, 1960s, and is still being built upon. So there is probably an academic law of Boyd that somebody could write where all this stuff is cross-referenced, but it's just a different learning culture. I believe, like from practitioners, and there's people that would not engage with Boyd beyond a 5-minute YouTube video because it's, it doesn't have immediate relevance to their work. So they're quite happy with the simple observe, orient. I see something, I get my gun out, I orientate on it, I point my gun towards it, I shoot it, I'm done. Right? I observe him falling down. Okay, great. Hey, the military version of OODA is intact, and that's not, the simple version is like a local minima in a machine learning algorithm, right? Local maxima, right? It's better than being at 0, and it's perfectly useful for some people.
You just have to suck less. That's it.
Yeah, right.
Being on is 0, or being at 1 is better than 0, but being at 100 is better than being at 1. And that's, I think, what people leave on the table when they misunderstand Boyd, McLuhan, Buckminster Fuller, Hayek, all that got on the list. And why? Usually it's because they're oriented by something else or somebody else that says, this is bad. Like this guy is not one of me, or this guy, I was talking about earlier on a call, that Blind Strategist book. Ian kind of tapped on it when we had him on last time, and no one's eviscerated that book better than Ian has. But it's like, that guy is so angry about something that doesn't have anything to do with the grand scope of relevance of everything that Boyd's talking about. He's going to focus on one little bit and say he did not understand Blitzkrieg. Cool. That doesn't mean that all the academic theory and things that he's explaining with universal phenomena, what is that, discount all that?
Yeah, I mean, he spent 40 odd years studying stuff that wasn't Blitzkrieg.
Yeah, right. Not only that, we had a guy on to talk about drugs had a role in that. Like, I mean, there's so much. Basically, by being an idiot, he ends up proving Boyd's point. Like, everything's incomplete, and you can't know with any certainty that when basically that guy, that author, was trying to determine the nature of a character of a system within itself. And in his circle, so at the all the people that hate Boyd, you can tell by reading the insert of the book who they are, and it's the usual suspects. Of course, they're going to say that. That's exactly what they would say, because they didn't come up with it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, like all of my kind of journey to Boyd, you wouldn't think it from the military, but I actually came to Boyd through Wardley Mapping. I'd never heard of it in the military, so. I'm not looking at Boyd through a military lens at all. I'm looking at Boyd through much more of a kind of agile software, community and Wardley Mapping lens. And then I discovered him, and then I started reading from that perspective. So I think there's this, that there are some really interesting islands of very focused academic study, which are kind of like closed systems, like some aspects of computer science and category theory, right? Or very, very many other kind of areas of academia. They're writing papers about papers, right? So they're digging deeper and deeper into more and more esoteric stuff, maybe getting further away from their environment, but they are discovering new structure. And then there's somebody who is interdisciplinary and not wedded to any of those things. Like, I think it's pretty natural that people that do that don't get much traction in these areas because they're not looking inward, right? They're not focusing their whole career on understanding one thing. And that might sound like I'm being negative on people that do that. Not at all. Like people who are able to focus on one thing for their entire career, make amazing breakthroughs. But the applicability of those things has to come from people that are having feet in many camps and synthesizing, destroying and creating.
I don't know how you can survive without being interdisciplinary. I don't understand it. And I think that that's one of the great crimes of Western civilization in the last 50 years or so, to completely downplay the importance of having a liberal education. And when I say liberal, I mean a well-rounded liberal arts education that includes letters, science, art, philosophy, that gives you a complete understanding of how to challenge assumptions, how to question things. We're so over specialized. And then the problem is all these things about being replaced by AI. That's exactly what Buckminster Fuller said, is like when the generalist turns into an extreme specialist, they're going to be replaced by automation at some point. And I think that we're seeing that in droves, and probably with a lot more to come. But one thing I think is a symptom of that, or like a pattern or a weak signal or whatever, is the fact that we have rejected classical education across the board. So people have no understanding of their environment. They have no understanding of feelings. They have no understanding of taste. They have no understanding of culture. They have no empathy. They don't understand logic. If you've seen on articles I've written on The Whirl about the 5T protocol, one of the easiest tactics to identify when someone's assaulting you verbally in an article or whatever, it's almost always logical fallacies, stacks of them, like absolute stacks of them. You could run political speeches through it. You could run articles. You could run all kinds of things, and you see the stack of giant fallacies, and you say, nobody knows who Aristotle is anyway, let alone Aristotelian logic. Like nobody has any damn idea. Or Euclid. They don't understand Euclid. That whole quest for like truth and beauty is completely out the door.
Yeah. And the even scarier thing is that it doesn't kind of fucking matter, because people who are doubling down hardest on that kind of rejection of truth and beauty and logic and all of those things are the ones that are kind of winning in today's world, right? If we look at,
I
don't want to make this a political thing, but the modern system just seems to be set up that people can weaponize that.
You're being oriented from without, not from within. So your orientation is being rewritten by somebody else. Again, this call earlier, I'd seen this video. This guy was talking about the downfall, or the apex or the peak rather, of everything in our contemporary times was actually 2007. It was the introduction of the iPhone. And ever since then, everything's dropped off. He was talking about he was using movies and comedy as his backdrop. And he was saying there was all these great movies, all this great film, all this great cinema, all this great cinematography, all this great comedy. It was just classic. And then all of a sudden it just stopped. And then the knee jerk is, well, Barack Obama got elected and he was real liberal and everything just went off the hill. And that's why nothing's funny anymore. And that's why movies are woke, or blah, blah, blah. And this guy was actually, and who, by the way, he is a conservative. He was actually saying, no, I reject that. It's actually the iPhone, because what ends up happening was when things become so packetized, when thinking became so, your orientation started to meld together, then you lost interest really fast. So it's really easy it got easier and easier and easier for you to be oriented from without. And now where we're at, and again, it's McLuhan freaking 101. If you go back and you read his things where he quote unquote predicts the internet, he's basically saying exactly what happened to it, literally to a T. Yeah, I mean, but it goes back to what you're saying, man. I mean, that's a complete rejection of how we were classically trained. I mean, where you live, I mean, Oxford and Cambridge and those things were set up as like spiritual monastic centers where people were inquiring and trying to figure out what the hell is going on in this universe. And they did it through different angles. They had math and science and geometry and music and art and whatever, history. Now it's like you come to my history class, you better think exactly how I make you think. I'm going to influence you to think this way, whether it's right wing, left wing, or something. But it's not dealing with reality. And then what it ends up doing is it's orienting people in a way that is not harmonized with what's actually going on. And then they also too, they don't have the ability to even do destruction and creation, because they're incapable of rewriting and revising those models that they've been inculcated with.
Yeah. And
again, we had more intellectual freedom in the Marine Corps than I did in the civilian world. There were strict
down to practice, though, right?
What's that?
if you don't practice something, you lose it, right? And if you're not,
or if you don't
practicing-
value something, you lose it.
yeah, and if you're not practicing the ability to destroy and create, because you're kind of taking stuff, and I'm as guilty of it as anyone else. Like, I sit on YouTube and like slurp up fucking slop, just like everybody else. But I think that becomes quite dangerous when it's the low energy. It's the kind of the low energy pathway, right? Of, I'm not going to destroy or create my mental models because that's too much effort. What I'll do
Right.
is sit here and be entertained.
But that what the trade-off is that I'm letting my orientation be completely written and authored by someone that's not me. And I'm still subject to the consequences of my own OODA loop sketch. Like, I'm still subject to the consequences, but I'm not reorienting in a way that is unique or original to me. I'm having it shaped by others. It's being disrupted and designed by others, not by me. And if I try to, then what happens? Well, I'm a conspiracy theorist, or I'm a quack, or I'm not a team player, or I'm, whatever. We've heard all the tropes.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, from an an energy point of view, the further away you get from the centroid of everyone else's point of view, the more energy you have to expend to stay there, right? So that becomes a harder and harder fight to keep fighting, right? So if the society is telling you to be a certain way and you decide not to be that way, and society, I don't know if that's even a term we can properly use anymore, but it becomes harder and harder to maintain your own little island if the big island is kind of drifting away from you in a direction that you don't really want.
There may be an opportunity to say that the higher energy states lead to more maneuverability, right? All of energy maneuverability theory, right? So if you do have, and I'm talking like free energy principle, if you are further away, then you have the ability to see things before others do. You can not predict, but you can get ahead, anticipate what's coming next.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting aspect of FEP that I think resonates really strongly with Boyd. Is Boyd's idea of the capacity for free and independent action, right? That is your free energy in the environment. The interesting thing, I can't remember if anyone's, maybe Mal did talked about this, but you have to balance the extract versus explore, right? So if you're just sitting in an extractive, like, I know this, I've got this down, I know this domain, I'm the expert, I'm just going to continue with my kind of low energy IGNC pathway because it works for me. It works for you until bang, it doesn't work, right? So you have to have some of the energy spent on, or wasted on exploring, right? So you have to have the ability to spend some of that on making mistakes, and otherwise you end up having a big dislocation between what you think the world is like and what it's actually like. And I think that's a really interesting aspect, especially in today's world with AI accelerating the change in everything. Like, for me as a programmer, how I write code has changed immeasurably in 6 months.
Yeah.
And that's some of that's good and some of that's bad. You have to maintain your ability to have, what's the word, like a kind of, a sense of what's good and bad. Like, you can't just be driven by the tools, or the whole kind of vibe coding. Where people are saying, oh yeah, I can build anything in a day. And yeah, sure, their AI tools will make it look like they've built something in a day, but what they've built is definitely not something that is robust or capable. But at the same time, that ability to build anything in a day, if you direct that correctly, means that my capacity as a programmer has increased, I don't know, conservatively, probably 10x.
Wow.
So, and if I was still in kind of Haskell land, which doesn't really embrace the kind of the AI side of things because it's not deterministic enough for us all. We're all very snobby about determinism, that I would not be exploring that, and that I would become less and less effective until such point as the world has moved so far away from me that it's now very, very difficult to catch up. And I think that happens across all domains all the time.
So I'm still stuck on this point that you brought up earlier, and that is you found the OODA loop from Wardley mapping. And how many years were you in the Marines before that?
4.
Okay. So they don't teach the OODA loop? And
not in the Royal Marines. Bearing in mind this was 2000 to 2004, so they may well teach it now. I know they teach it very fucking badly at staff college in the UK. So like major to colonel, I think staff colleges. But as an enlisted Marine, I didn't hear about it at all. I mean, the motto of the Royal Marines is be the first to understand, the first to adapt and respond, and the first to overcome. So
Nice.
we definitely know and understand OODA on one level. But yeah, I never came across Boyd's work at all until I, from the agile software side of things, found Wardley, and then from him found OODA.
Your brothers across the sea didn't get it authentically. I mean, we got Boyd, but not in the scope of Boyd's work. We got it in a warfighting friendly version and basically the basic decision cycle, but things like conceptual spiral or strategic game, or even, I don't think I ever saw OODA loop sketch until I was actually out of the Marines.
So. Yeah, so even in the book Team of Teams, they get the OODA loop wrong, right?
Yeah.
And then Simon Worley does a nice job, but it's still linear observe-orient-decide-act, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not wrong. It's a perspective. This is how we see it. This is what it means. And what we're saying is there's more behind that. So that means to me that if you're to look at Wardley Maps now and what could you make stronger? What can you make better? And I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I think it's fantastic. It's all relative, right? Before Wardley mapping, we didn't have much, right? I mean, when we started using Wardley mapping, 8, 9 years ago, it changed. It was talking about destruction and creation, right? That model of how to do strategy is mind blowing. And the reason it is because it forces you to look outside, right? Go outside your own OODA loop and understand the environment. What are the opportunities for action that are out there? What do you need to do? And now we're starting to see people do energy time mapping. We're doing a little bit of that. There's some folks in safety that are bringing over their safety approaches into this mapping world, getting it ready for agentic AI, which we've seen, and it's just freaking mind blowing, right? Because it is about the relationships between, I'll call it objects for now, but functions. The relationship between functions now is going to be driving things. But at the moment, most organizations don't know how to Wardley map. They don't know how to leverage the wisdom of crowd, how to do red teaming techniques. They don't understand basic OODA. They understand basic OODA, if you want to put it that way. They don't understand the real OODA loop. And that's what we're trying to let people know is, hey, we're going to give you a low energy approach, which I believe teaching the OODA loop is the lowest energy approach to understanding how things work. Right. That's because it kind of connects everything. Right. I mean, if we want to talk about mental health and psychedelic assisted therapy, boom, we can talk about that. We go right into 5th generation warfare. We can flip over and talk about the importance of strategy, which we just talked about. Right. With the idea of Wardley mapping, but improving on that. We could talk about, the ecological approach to coaching in sports, how that works. There's so many things. We talk about mission command. We could talk about controllers outside and bottom up from the Toyota production system. So many things we can bring to the fight with this package called the OODA loop, right? So no, again, I was just kind of shocked that you came across OODA in Wardley mapping.
Yeah, I mean, it is bizarre, isn't it? Yeah, I've talked to people multiple times who've described, how things have unfolded on ops and things like that. I never did anything super, I got out before Afghanistan was really, really kicking off, but, that was pure OODA over there, right? You can drill all day long, right? You can teach the components of fighting all you want, but you actually have to learn fighting by getting in a fight. And getting in a fight, as I understand it, in Helmand and everything else was pure OODA, right? Just, pure adaptation all the time. And I think,
I mean,
to your point,
that's interesting that you say that. In that location of the world, they certainly understand it.
Yeah, despite being very
Stone Age. I mean, they understand that better.
And despite being in a very, one might naturally assume that kind of hierarchical kind of tribal culture would be very difficult for ideas to propagate through. But what's that paper? One tribe at a time.
Mm-hmm.
That's pure OODA as well, right? And rejected by big military because apparently 40 years between Vietnam and there wasn't long enough.
Well, the biggest military, General Petraeus, told everybody to read that. Nobody did, and he was on our show. We talked about it. I mean, it was still definitive. I used to use that on Wall. You could run sales teams with that paper.
Yep,
it's that good,
Yep.
But Yeah, it's like anything else. It's just maybe we're all meant to be hermits and live in a monastery and talk about this shit. It's like I read an article. It's up there on the Whirl, and I'd been saying this thing for years. And it was from reading about the Trojan Wars, and you think back to the Trojan Wars. If you remember, Cassandra worked in the temple. She was one of the girls in the temple or whatever. Cassandra's curse was like she knew the truth and she knew it was going to happen, and she told everybody everything that was going to happen, and the curse was that no one would believe her. And I think that a lot of the times there is a Cassandra trap for what we talk about, because we can easily see the patterns clearly and we can show it to people, but they don't want it. They're just like, shut up, Cassandra. I don't want to hear that. That was the title of the article, was hey, Cassandra, shut up. So anyway.
So Ben, what are you working on these days? What kind of, how's your business going?
Yeah, so I've been doing quite a lot of agentic AI projects. I mean, there's a whole kind of AI OODA thing that we haven't even touched on, which I think is super interesting, to look at how LLMs have gone from basically nothing to everywhere in a few years, and to look at the emergent kind of practice and learning of how these things are being used and the software libraries that are coming. I mean, that's very Wardley mapping-esque as well, right? You've got the thing coming in from the left of the Wardley map, moving across to the being a commodity, and then all of the unfolding richness of stuff that happens on top of that. So I'm doing a lot of agentic kind of software engineering projects at the moment, at the same time as recognizing that LLMs, I think, are probably largely an evolutionary dead end. When you contrast them with, I kind of wish that whatever the guys at Verses were working on was a bit more in the kind of open source world. I know they've got their protocol, which is open source, the FEP inspired AI.
Well, let's talk about this. When I talk about large language models, I usually associate it with the linear OODA loop, right? And you see a lot of folks talking about linear OODA loop with large language models. In the last couple of weeks, I don't have the articles up right now, but they're talking about agentic AI and the OODA loop. And I'm like, well, that's you're talking about linear OODA loop, right? Which is, again, not completely wrong. It's a perspective of looking at this. What you're looking at and what we're looking at with Versus and active inference AI, and then there's some other AI out there as well, reinforcement learning, which is it's less linear OODA, but not as strong as like free energy and active inference AI. It's growing. So it's growing within that image that we showed of the OODA loop earlier. It's another perspective saying, hey, we're actually actively doing these things and we're lowering the energy requirement, just like we do with natural systems, to engage with the external world. So again, what's happening is they're discovering the real OODA loop. They're like, hey, this thing isn't working. We're like, yeah, we told you that. It's not going to work, right? So is that how you're kind of seeing it, or any differences?
So I think within large language models, there are. So the interesting thing that's happened is that you've got your open AI, which depending on who you speak to, could very well be the Enron of the current times, who came up with this. They didn't come up with the transformer architecture, but they came up with ChatGPT 3.5. And it was this fucking magic technology. Suddenly I can throw text in there and ask it in human language to translate that text into something else, and I get something that's magical. It was actually absolutely incredible. And as I think I mentioned earlier, like the programming kind of subculture that I come from somewhat discounts AI because we prefer to work on these kind of mathematical structures and build stuff that's more deterministic. So it was kind of an eye-opener for me. And then that very, very quickly was followed by lots of other companies who were also working on similar things. And, lo and behold, once you have an LLM that's trained up well enough, actually building a ChatGPT-like experience on top of it is not very fucking difficult at all, which is why there are so many of them now, right? So you look at DeepSeek when it came out, obviously there's a bit of spin here and there's probably a bit of fifth generation warfare from the Chinese government here and how that was put out and how it became open source. I'm speculating here, but I'm assuming that there's some pretty dialed in doctrine and strategy going on when it comes to that. And suddenly, DeepSeek came out. It was slightly different than ChatGPT, but much better, 10% the cost. Apparently, it'd been trained for next to nothing, and the methodology got made open source as well. So now there's this whole kind of plethora of different AI models, different inference providers. I don't know if you guys have ever come across like Cerberus or Sambanova, but you go on those and that's like another ChatGPT experience. You go on Sambanova and it generates text like 10x quicker than ChatGPT. It's fucking amazing, right? So now there's this real forest of different LLMs, different providers, different inference providers, different infrastructures. And on top of that, there's a whole forest of open source agentic frameworks and things like this. So you can build some pretty amazing shit, even though at the same time you recognize that LLMs are probably, from that kind of energetic and evolutionary point of view, a dead end. But there's like someone said to me the other month, or I read it somewhere, if all progress on LLMs was to stop tomorrow, you would still have 10 or 20 years of absolute mayhem in the kind of economic world because of just how effective they can be. The thing that I'm working on one of my projects at the moment is a way of answering cold emails. So previously you would send out thousands of cold emails. Someone would come back and be interested, and then you'd have to hire somebody to converse back and forth with them and book a call, because what you really want is that person on the call, right? Now you can get AI to do a pretty decent job of that, right? So the ability to send and handle cold emails is now hugely cheaper, faster. And that pattern will pertain across, whole swathes of the economy. And that's even knowing that LLMs are probably an evolutionary dead end compared to active inference inspired AI.
Can you create an LLM for me that answers those cold emails?
Sure.
All right. So we'll have our bots talking to each other.
Yeah. You mean that you want one that tells people to fuck off when they send you
it doesn't matter what I tell them. I just want them to mess with them. Yeah.
That's the thing, like how to really maximize using agents. You hear about these people like, yeah, I have a staff of 12. Oh, really? How many people? And it's 12 agents, like AI agents that keep their calendar and book meetings.
Yeah. And you can build a reasonable facsimile of an OODA loop using an LLM and the ability to have tools and access to the outside world, right? It might not be a particularly great idea to do that because of prompt injection and things like this, but you can build something with an agentic framework that looks a bit like an OODA loop, right? Good enough, right? Better than good enough. It's definitely not human replaceable, but good enough that your humans can be augmented and their capacity expanded quite significantly. But it still isn't proper what I assume will come out of the active inference world, which is,
Well, let's talk about that. So what is it? So you're saying that these LLMs, you can get OODA-like capabilities currently, but what's missing? I want to go back to the conversation with Dan Mapes and what I learned about the spatial web. Dude, I didn't understand Web 2.0, Web 3.0, or Web 1.0. I'm like, what are you talking about? So what I learned is the 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions, right? So where have we seen 3 dimensions and 4 dimensions before? Well, we saw it from John Boy, right? His aerial attack study gave us a lot of stuff that he gets into theory, right? Which gave us a structure to understand dogfighting in a 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional world of time, right? Time compression. So from that, it's all about relationships. It's about the geometry. And then you look at what Dan Mapes and Gabriel Rene came up with, and that's the same thing. They're looking at, hey, we need this new Web 3.0 or whatever you want to call it to have these agents interact on it, to access this 3-dimensional world. So is that, I'm sorry, is kind of a leading question. Is that what's missing, is the protocols for these agents, or is it much more?
I think it's more than that. So, you can have the protocols, like, for example, a thing that I played around with a few months ago is using just an off-the-shelf LLM model to understand knowledge graphs using like an ontology language, right? An ontology is a way of representing knowledge. Yeah, that's pretty cool. It works quite well. What that doesn't do is change the orientation of the model, right? When you have an LLM, what you get out of the box will never change, right? Its orientation will never change, right? You can augment it with what's called retrieval augmented generation, right? You can take information from your business domain, from whatever you care about, and you can package that up and you can feed it into the prompt that you use to get your answer. But fundamentally, all you're ever doing, even if you dress it up with fancy agents and whatnot, is you take some text or some input data, can be an image. You take some input data, you give it to the model does its thing based on its internal inherent training, and it gives you back text. no matter what you ever feed that model, it will never change its inherent training. Whereas my understanding of what active inference does, or the AI built on top of active inference, is it is changing its orientation as it goes, right? So it's updating its training, is updating its model as it interacts with the world, which is far, far more.
It's going through something that we brought up earlier. It's going through cycles of destruction and creation, right?
Correct. Yeah, correct. And it's doing it at a far lower energy cost as well, because it's not taking, a rack of GPUs to do this.
Well,
stuff.
that brings us back to DNC. Is the purpose of DNC is a low energy approach to survive, potentially. It's the alpha and omega, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, although there are, there's huge strides being made in LLMs. I've got, low power LLMs that I can run on my laptop. They're not particularly smart. You have to break things down and give them very small problems to solve.
Just like a Marine.
No offense taken. That's why Boyd came to the Marine Corps. He knew it was a good place to lots of material to work with.
All right. Sorry about that. You just described a Marine.
That's a good one. That's completely thrown me off my stroke. Sorry about that. You can get LLMs that will run on a laptop, and I think eventually we'll have LLMs that will run on a phone and be more kind of edge devices. But we won't ever have LLMs that are intelligent enough to act like what I've seen coming out of the active inference world at the low energy strike. These things run on a small CPU. So, I think, naturally LLMs will evolve to be less and less, requiring less and less energy, and people will come up with clever tricks. But I don't believe LLMs will ever be able to have that kind of continual destruction and creation OODA loop built into them. So at the moment, people like me have to construct that OODA loop around essentially an unchanging LLM.
So I have to ask you guys, did we come up with a simple way to explain what's the difference between an LLM and an active inference agent, or just an agent in general, and that's DNC? I mean, to me, that's the simplest way to, what's the difference? Hey, they don't destroy and create their own world model.
Yeah, I think so.
Problem solved.
Well,
get it out in the wire, get Denise out there, spreading the message.
Yeah, I have to tell you. So when we were in California, a bunch of folks were talking about all the LLMs they were building, and they were all excited, and they heard us get up and speak, and they're like, the hell are you guys talking about? That was the first time they heard about this, right? This is downtown Hollywood. Big money, folks that work with Meta and folks that work with, or had worked with Steve Jobs. Here they are, and they're just like, this is new to us. What are you guys talking about, right? And for us, it's like, hey, if you understand the OODA loop, you could see that this is coming. And I told Dan this. I said, when I found out about active inference from the psychedelic assisted therapy world, I start wondering who's actually using this in anything. And to me, it was two places. One, Hedgeye up in Connecticut, they're using the OODA loop, not the best OODA loop. It's getting better. And then it was Versus. And it wasn't until I think they made the announcement that Carl Friston became their chief scientific officer. I was like, holy shit, I know who that guy is. At least I know his work. They've got to be onto something that the rest of the folks don't understand, right? And then I've had some chats with Gabriel Rene about constructal law, a little bit about the OODA loop, and of course the conversation with Dan Mapes, and a lot of conversations with Denise. And then I don't know if you're following. Is it Dennis O?
Yeah.
To Gaussian, and I'm like, dude, you lost me at the Gaussian splatting. So,
even that is it's all destruction and creation at the end of the day. Like the thing that I'm kind of playing with at the moment is from category theory. There's this idea of algebras and co-algebras, right? Co-algebras compress things down, and algebras expand things out, and all of the stuff, even actually LLM training, right, is essentially built on this whole kind of idea of convolution, right? So you've got some, like, call it a two-dimensional grid, right? For simplicity. So you've seen Conway's Game of Life. You ever seen that? It's like a little, it's a two-dimensional grid, and there's squares in it can be the full or empty. And then there's rules about if there's too many neighbors around a square, it dies. And if there's just enough neighbors, it continues.
How big can they go? 16 by 16, 8 by 8, or
huge.
what are we at?
Yeah, it can be huge.
Okay.
And so even with this super, super simple environment and very, very, like, so there's 3 rules, I think, right? You end up getting really complex emergent behavior and cycles of emergent behavior, right? So you get these kind of really kind of almost rich environments, and people have built versions of Conway's game, multicolored. There's a guy, he was on Jim Rutt's show. He built a model economy. I think it was called Sugarland or something like that. So it was basically a version of Conway's game where there was energy in the environment, and it ended up like these societies generated from these very, very simple rules. So think like ants and how simple the algorithms that an individual ant works on. But the reason I brought that up is because that is an example of convolution, right? You take an area in a space, you look at the area around it, based on the properties of that area around it, you calculate a new value for the space. That is what reinforcement learning is. That's what machine learning algorithm does, right? That's what the training essentially boils down to, is look at the area around you. It's the graph, the neural network, right? So that is destruction and creation, right? It's look around you, take that information, create a new state from it. And all we do in programming is pretty much like that as well. I mean, we dress it up with lots of like fancy bullshit, but essentially that's what we do, right? When we read a database, we do that. And when we send text into an LLM and get text back, we're doing that internally within the LLM. So I think the thing that's come out to me of like studying Boyd in the context of category theory is that I'm convinced, I don't have the maths for it yet, but I'm convinced that there is a category theoretic model of Boyd's OODA loop, which then is applied to FEP. It's applied to the destruction and creation, the creative destruction economics paper. What else have I got in here? There's a whole bunch of stuff that it's applied to. And there's also semantic space-time, so promise theory. So all of these things are made of these kind of small, composable, mathematically derived rules that interact together to kind of generate these really complex and rich systems.
Hey, Ben, appreciate your time today, man. We're going to wrap it up there. Where can our listeners find your work if you have a website, or I know you have a LinkedIn profile? Anything else you want to share?
Yeah, LinkedIn profile is probably the best. My website's hopelessly out of date. I've been too busy writing AI shit to do my website.
LinkedIn's hopelessly out of date. You talk about destruction, creation, man, could go on and on.
Yeah, I mean it is getting all very samey, isn't it? Very AI sloppy. And anyway, I'm at Commando Dev on LinkedIn. I am planning to get back into kind of a bit more regular posting soon, but I've been a bit quiet.
Come over to Substack. The water's just fine, and it's just it's a completely different experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look at that.
Nice. Well, I'm glad we finally got this conversation recorded. I know that we've had other conversations in the past. I think we did the OODA loopers. That was like 6 years ago. Do you remember that?
God, wasn't it? Long time.
4 years ago. Damn, man. And it's so much, I guess we've learned so much since then too, right? I mean, it's actually, if you look at that, where we started with that was actually pretty interesting. And what we went through today, night and day, right?
Yeah.
Big gap.
I mean, that was a really good format, I think, multidisciplinary, people with different backgrounds. I know you had, Dave was your first guest.
Yeah.
Who else have you had on that was in the OODA loopers?
We've had Nigel. We've had, who else was in there? There's a few others.
Lou was on the other day, right?
Yeah, Lou was in there.
Lou, Chet's been on a lot.
Was Charlie Protzman in there on the OODA loopers?
Yeah, Charlie was on one of the episodes.
Yeah, then his whole background with the what do you call it, CSS or CCS in Japan, it's pretty amazing. A lot of posts in the last week on LinkedIn about that, actually, which is kind of cool. But yeah. Who else was in that? Do you remember? Was Sonia?
No, I don't think Sonia was. There was and
Kim. That's right.
Oh my God, my memory is terrible. It's late here.
Yeah, weird.
Yeah, but the really nice thing there was that people were all able to bring their individual kind of backgrounds and perspectives, and I think we were able to fairly successfully map that to OODA in a way that everyone could understand. So OODA was almost like the kind of common the common thread that everyone can map to, which I think is a real testament to the Boyd and his work.
Concur, man. All right. Hey, we'll keep you on for a second, but appreciate your
Yeah.
time. I know it's late for you. Looks like you're,
Go to sleep.
all right, man.
All right.